So our next speaker is Ed Baetge from Nestle Institute of Health Sciences. And I think that in contrast to my ridiculing the labels on the supplements in the supermarket, I think that Nestle has made a very aggressive approach into bringing some science into nutrition with the intention of finding the right supplement, the right approach to the individual. And so with that, over to Ed.
I flew all the way from Geneva to get here yesterday, and I guess the reason why I'm kind of smiling at you is I took one of these magic formulations, melatonin, last night. And I woke up, went for a run down the street, and I feel perfectly fine. I'll take another one tonight just to make sure that everything's reset. But who knows? Is that a placebo on me? Does it work on everyone? No, by any stretch of the imagination. And what really is the basis of nutrition and natural products and how do they work is really what this institute is all about. And I hope to give you a little flavor for that. So first, why? And there's a number of reasons why. Healthcare systems, 1 out of 5 will be over 65 in the year 2020. And healthcare systems must adapt to the needs of the elderly. 3 out of 5 will die from a chronic disease, and there needs to be more emphasis on prevention and treatment of chronic diseases. And these are multifactorial, they're not just one single gene. 1 out of 5 will be overweight or obese. There needs to be ways in which to treat the increasing comorbidities associated, like heart disease and diabetes, of course, and preventing that obesity. And of course, you know that the world's going to spend a lot, trillions and trillions on the healthcare system as more and more of us age and progress into this area. So we need to contain costs and increase funding for research. On the other side, you think about nutrition and malnutrition, and you look at health status versus an ability to actually get the right nutrients into your diet on a daily basis. And you see that a billion people are in chronic hunger situations. These are the macronutrient and micronutrient, basically, deficiencies. There's hidden hunger in at least 2 billion people across the world. And of course, as we know, in terms of diabetes and obesity and the metabolic syndrome, eating a lot of calories doesn't mean you're healthy. Those can be just empty calories. And so essentially you're in a nutritional deficit or insufficiency. And then maybe there's 2 billion people that think they're well nourished but don't really understand the relationship of their genome, their environment, but they're trying to do their best to remain healthy. So chronic diseases and malnutrition have many multiple inputs. Foods that we consume and the relative quantities of these foods and their nutritional content. A really important thing is nutritional security and the way food is manufactured and the nutrient content in the soils, etc. In terms of what type of nutrient content you'll get. For instance, if you eat a banana coming from the store here in Boulder, you're going to get a lot of potassium, but you're not going to get all the major nutrients that normally are found in bananas, say in Brazil, where there are many varieties of bananas. So we kind of engineered those things out. So living conditions, genes, and the environment, both in early life all the way through your adult life. And so the first 1,000 days of life are probably almost as important or more important than in the later years in life. And understanding how our body, how our genome relates to that environment is really key, and how it's modified by that environment, what you eat, what stress levels the pregnant mother is under, etc., or what conditions you live in is critical. So we really believe in this holistic strategic approach, not necessarily in magic bullets, although there are instances of magic bullets that really work. And not to say that we don't believe that those are still possible today and will be possible in the future. But for looking at these really complex diseases like diabetes, like obesity, like brain disorders. We really need to understand a multiple of inputs that are affecting why we get these as we age. And so this is really going to require a system science approach, and it's one of the major efforts that we're building into this new institute. And we believe that really there isn't one size that fits all. You know, we're humans, we're the same but different, as we know. Our history and culture alter how we respond. We also have multiple intersecting pathways to both health and disease that overlap. And from the nutritional point of view, the composition of large agri-foods varies in terms of their nutritional content. Culture and food preparation varies, and nutrient security in terms of what levels of these nutrients are maintained in the products that we eat. And I kind of focus you in on this one slide here that is in a store and happens to be in Arkansas, where you have an aisle 4 with Pop-Tarts, juice, oatmeal, drink mixes, Gatorade, cereal bars, and then something called nutritional food. Wow. So now, why the heck would Nestle want to do something like this? And I just throw this slide up here really to kind of give you a history. And Nestle is almost 150 years old. And I never imagined I'd be working for Nestle, a food company. My background is in biotech primarily, and stem cells, both in the nervous system as well as the endocrine system. And I never really realized that I would be in this. But I've always been interested in nutrition in some way. You know, how, what I'm eating really is affecting my health. And Nestle started out with this guy, Henri Nestle, in Vevey, Switzerland, who first made this milk and cereal product that actually used to treat an infant that couldn't breastfeed. And that was the beginning of Nestle 150 years ago. And Nestle has a very big business in infant nutrition and is trying to understand more and more about the epigenetics of how the environment influences the epigenetics during development, and how to actually help mothers have the right nutrition for their babies, as well as once they're born, what to give them once they finish breastfeeding or can't breastfeed at all. So this progression goes quite some distance. But what's really kind of interesting, you can see out here later on, Novartis. Well, what's that? Well, we purchased the medical nutrition business of Novartis in 2008. And just recently, we purchased the infant nutrition business of Wyeth Nutrition. Now, why would a food company be doing that? So that's what I want to get to. The other part that you should know is some facts about this huge company. It's $92.2 billion in sales in 2002. That's like unfathomable to me. I mean, I worked in biotech. We worked on a couple $100,000 a year, right? I mean, what does this number mean? You know, this is huge. 340,000 employees over 150 countries, almost 500 factories, 2,000 brands, 1 billion Nestle products sold every day. Wow, that's amazing. You know, what do I have to do with that? Well, what has been kind of percolating in Nestle for quite some time, and there are some pretty visionary thinkers there, and that's part of the reason why I joined to come and help them build this institute, is that we've progressed from thinking in terms of what food is, in terms of just getting caloric intake and basic nutrients, all the way into health prevention or health and disease prevention and health science. And essentially where Nestle sees the biggest impact for the future of food being considered to be the biggest drug that you take every day, and that's what I believe it really truly is, and that's probably part of the reason why I said, let's come and help Nestle try to achieve this long-term vision. How does this work, and how can we actually develop medical nutrition products of the future that would help to alter disease course, slow it, or even prevent it? So basically, there's pharma, which we know a lot about, and many of us participate in taking some of the major fruits of the pharma industry. Then there's food, but then there's this space, nutritional medicine in between, possibly. The thing is that this space is not been traditionally developed by pharma. In fact, pharma's selling off basically a lot of that infrastructure to people who are willing to purchase it, and Nestle so far has. And so we want to try to develop that space, but we're going to use many of the same tools that pharma uses. We're going to have to look at mechanism of action. We'll have to run clinical studies. We'll actually have to get regulatory approval just like drugs. But we want to work from products that are found in the natural food chain, that are considered grass for the most part, generally accepted as safe, that actually could have been in the food chain for thousands of years, like traditional Chinese medicines. So we decided in around 2010 to announce the establishment of the Nestle Health Science Company, which would develop these products, and the Nestle Institute of Health Sciences. And essentially what it is today is there's that big sun of Nestle over there with a huge gravity, and then you have these little moons and satellites and asteroids running around the outside trying not to get sucked in, and that's one of the reasons why I couldn't be here yesterday, is I got sucked in. But nevertheless, the Nestle Health Sciences Company has bought and made strategic collaborations with a variety of different companies: VitaFlow, CM&D, Vital Foods, Prometheus, Axera, Nutrition Science Partners, PAMLAB was their recent acquisition. These are all in medical nutrition or diagnostic spaces that are in the major focus areas, which I'll show you in a second, of where we want to try to apply our science and the development of nutritional products. This Nestle Health Science Company is around 3,000 people already, and then that also includes all of these acquisitions that have recently been made. The Institute itself started 2.5 years ago with just me as one, and today you can see we're 95 people. The main areas in which we are working are in the newest areas are the brain health area, the metabolic health, and the gastrointestinal health area, and many of these acquisitions fit into those disease areas. And the areas that came from the Novartis medical nutrition acquisition are aging medical care, critical care and surgery, and pediatric medical care, which were already established businesses, and that was the basis of this new company. It's actually at arm's length from Nestle. It isn't part of the Nestle food business per se. And our sort of history is very short. It's about 2.5 years. As of 2011, I was one person, and today we're about 95, and we inaugurated the Institute at the end of last year. The Institute is based or embedded on the campus of the EPFL in Lausanne, Switzerland. It's one of the up-and-coming, really good campuses from both an engineering point of view and a life sciences point of view. It's sort of like the Caltech of Switzerland, and then there's the ETH, which is the MIT of Switzerland, you would say. But this is only an 8 million person country. But it still has very highly trained individuals in the sciences and machining technologies and engineering technologies. And we built on the campus actually 2 buildings, actually occupied half of one and all of the other, and we just got into the second building. It's about 60,000 square feet, and we're building a variety of different core technology platforms and science investigation platforms, health platforms within these 2 buildings. Why did we say NIHS? And I think maybe you're starting to get an idea of why. Really want to advance the science to develop medical nutrition space. And our scientific approach is to build into this institute an integrated group of people that are working on functional genomics and actually have the equipment to run all of the assays that you just heard, many of which you heard from Tim in the talk just before. Human cellular and animal models. This is really based on IPS approaches where we can look at defined genetic populations and build humanized models both in vitro and in vivo. Mitochondrial function and metabolic signaling, natural products chemistry, clinical trials, and we're actually involved in many different clinical initiatives, and these are more of the exploratory nature as opposed to the traditional type of trials that you're used to in the pharmaceutical business. And our whole idea is to really understand this influence of diet, the genome, and how they interplay. And it requires not just looking at the genome and its output, but as you heard from Tim, looking at metabolites, looking at the proteins, looking at the vitamins themselves that are in the blood, and integrating all of this. And so really where we're working, what our vision is to understand and model health through systems biology interrelationships of diet, genes, and lifestyle, and to really try to shift this curve from health to disease to healthy aging if we can, and try to work as early in the disease process as possible. But this is very, very complex work because there are many different factors that are intersecting. And the only way you're going to really get at this is to really intersect large amounts of data and build models that make sense, that can give you predictive value. So we're also basically very open to actually combining what we call NX, or nutritional approaches, with RX, which are classic pharmaceutical approaches as well. We're not opposed to actually putting these together. But in the concept of building this, it's not that we want to become a pharma company. We don't want to necessarily create new chemical entities. Pharma is great at doing that. We want to actually exploit the nutritional side, and if it makes sense to combine that with a pharma side, then that's what we'll do. And then the thing that kind of links everything together that Tim also emphasized quite strongly is the diagnostic approach, because we really need to understand across the whole patient journey from health to disease how to diagnose where you are at any stage. And this is where eventually we will empower ourselves to become more involved in our own health care. And so we would want to have diagnostic companions along with nutritional products that could be used. For instance, in Alzheimer's disease that you just heard about from Tim, I mean, there have been many failed attempts so far. If you were to diagnose someone with Alzheimer's disease and you had nothing to give them, that would be a shame. And so the ethical conundrum really is should we diagnose people and tell them that they're going to have Alzheimer's disease if there isn't anything that they can do about it? It really bears on your own personal values and your own personal opinion about whether you want to know or don't want to know. So I think what we'd like to do is, as much as possible, develop companion products. And one of the key collaborations that we're working on now has to do with developing a nutritional approach or a natural product approach for early Alzheimer's disease, which I'll highlight later. So in order to do this, you've got to take both the reductionist approach, you've got to look at mechanism of action, but you also have to look at the downward approach. You have to bring in all of the physiological data and the environmental lifestyle data as well, and you have to meld those. And that's why it's so complex, and that's why today we think we can embark on that road because of the platforms that have been developed, the deep sequencing platforms now being applied to the gut microbiome and microbiome in general, trying to understand the ecology of what's going on, but using these big platforms. And one of the ways I first came in contact with Larry was because of the platform that he built over the last 25 years, which gives you an exquisite insight into what's going on with proteins that are in various biological samples. And we believe that complements very well with what we're trying to achieve in terms of integration of all of these data sets. So we both have to take a reductionist approach, bottom up, and a downward approach, and even a middle out approach. And what we're really trying to do is, we know we're all unique, and today's solutions are not necessarily geared for individuality, but with the exception of specific cases that are dominant mutations, for example, where you go after those individual dominant mutations. But since for the chronic diseases, we're all going to be differently having those chronic, different influences are causing those chronic diseases. And so we want to eventually target and finally personalize, but many, many years in the future. We want to target by using the analysis of these holistic data sets to actually put together models that explain why there are these differences and why different groups of people are basically coming down with these diseases and for what reasons. And so basically at the Institute, we're building this integrated systems biology approach that has deep sequencing platforms, molecular biomarkers, and metabolomics platforms based on mass spec and NMR, natural products in microbiome analysis, and then we're moving on the biological side. We have circadian rhythm biology group and an aging sarcopenia muscle group. Mitochondrial function is a critical component of what we're working on. And then also preclinical animal models, just as you do in biotech and academics and in pharma, and the clinical studies, which are more exploratory types of intervention studies, and also participating in other studies that are ongoing. They're actually using dietary approaches to try to affect disease outcome. And one example of this is this one of the biggest dietary intervention studies that was actually run in Europe in the early 2000s, headed by Wim Seres at the University of Maastricht, and it had many different components. But really what it was really designed to do was to try to establish predictive models for success in weight loss and resistance to weight gain. And we got involved because we are building this systems approach, and we want to try to take a lot of the data that was generated in this that still hasn't all been put together in models and analyzed to try to get outcomes from this study and try to help to do that. And so this study was designed where basically there were a couple thousand people that were overweight that were brought into the trial, and they were sampled biologically, fat samples, blood samples, physiological measurements taken, and then they were put on an energy-restricted diet, and those individuals of the 2,000 enrolled who lost 8% of their body weight were enrolled, and then they were sampled again for all those same parameters. And then they were put on 4 different dietary interventions. Some of the approaches that we're taking were supermarkets were set up where the patient can only shop in a place where they could buy foods that were high glycemic index foods. And then another part of the supermarket was set up so that they could buy foods that were low glycemic index foods or high protein foods or low protein foods. And so that's the way we were trying to control and actually monitor what they took in. And so after 6 months on those 4 different diets, basically all these samples were taken for RNA-seq, for metabolomics, for GWAS analysis, and essentially what was initially discovered in this is that it didn't matter what diet they were on, it appeared to be much more important what the genetics of the individual was. So that was a really interesting finding. It's still not fully analyzed at this point. We're just at the earliest stages of putting all the data together. Just to give you a couple other vignettes of what's going on and what we're building into the Institute, it's still in the early stages. As I said, we have an aging lab that's focused on sarcopenia and age-related loss of muscle mass. And I think one of the biggest things that affects us as we age is really this condition, you might call it frailty, where it's combined with loss of cognitive function, you lose muscle function, and then you lose bone structure. And this frailty condition is one area that we're very, very much interested in for late in life. Being able to keep muscle mass, which then allows you to metabolize your glucose and your food properly, is very important. Being able to maintain muscle mass for bone strength is very important. And being able to maintain muscle mass to keep your brain healthy is also very important, and vice versa. So really believe in this, this particular area is going to be a major focus for us. Because of my previous stem cell background, we're doing a lot of work in creating humanized models, starting with the pancreas, which we developed actually with a company called Viasite in San Diego. And that model is up and running with iPS cells, and now we're developing the hepatocyte model, both for in vitro studies and, more importantly, the humanized in vivo studies where you can feed various diets to animals with a humanized pancreatic system coming from different genetic backgrounds and look at the effects. And then you can actually extract these cells in a small device. They're contained in a small device and actually do all types of analysis, in vitro analysis, on the effects of those dietary interventions. So that model system is set in place now and starting to take on speed and traction. As I said, mitochondrial function, we're actually focusing it in two areas, the pancreatic beta cell, as well as in astrocyte and neuronal energy metabolism, because we obviously believe mitochondrial function is key. And one of the, for neuronal function, and one of the key areas that we're focused in here is with the ketogenic diets, where you can actually take a mid-chain fatty acid and increase the level of ketone bodies, which allow you to actually get improved energy metabolism into the mitochondrial pathway. And this has already been shown in limited clinical studies by a company here in Colorado called Xera, that actually has developed this technology and is now involved in initiating a much larger clinical study that hopefully we will also be analyzing some of the samples coming from these clinical patient populations that will be run in this trial. What's interesting about this compound is it works very well in people who are ApoE4 negative, that is, ones that don't carry the ApoE4 phenotype, especially homozygous, but also heterozygous. Those patients don't respond well to this diet, but nobody knows why. And one of the things we're trying to figure out is why. And so, interestingly, we will basically analyze a set of patients in this trial that are ApoE4 positive as well as ApoE4 negative and try to piece together all of the metabolomics data, the genetic data, very much larger genetic analysis, exome sequencing data, and RNA analysis to try to understand what's going on. We're also very focused in the diabetes area, both at the molecular level through AMP kinase regulation, and also at the cellular level through our stem cell-based programs for production of pancreatic islets, and also at the whole body level where we're involved in clinical studies that are looking at, for instance, reducing glycemic index by actually administering a slow-digesting starch into the diet. And if you could reduce just by a few percentage points the level of glucose in the blood, you can have a major long-term chronic effect on potential development of diabetes in the future. So we want to look at all of the omics around those patients, the ones that seem to respond, the ones that don't, and in between to try to understand, how do you actually target this appropriately to the right patient population? And that's really key. So, and I mentioned briefly that the human microbiome is a really key area that we're going to develop because we think the diversity of this set of organisms within humans is amazing. As you know, there are 10 times more cells, the microbiome, than cells in the body, and 100 times more genetic information. And we know very little about how that really works and how that it's so important in terms of interaction with the diet, in terms of metabolism, in terms of generating specific molecules within the gut that influence gut physiology as well as the rest of our body. And understanding that from a point of view of GI health, from the point of view of gastrointestinal and brain health, is a major area of focus of the Institute and will be in the future. Finally, I just want to say a few words about essential micronutrients. I think one of the reasons why I was so intrigued by this opportunity to come and try to help Nestle build something like this is that we just don't understand, what levels of micronutrients we have in our blood. I mean, we may take vitamins every day. We may think we eat all of the healthy vegetables and fruits and fibers that we need, but we have no idea whether or not all that stuff is getting in and it's actually in the right levels in our blood and in our tissues. And so we believe that we have to develop a one-stop shop to actually essentially be able to measure all of the fat-soluble and water-soluble vitamins that are essential, the amino acids that are essential, the fatty acids that are essential for everyday health. And that's kind of the foundation of the whole thing. And still, there isn't one place in the world that does that. And so basically, we're putting that all in place, and we're going to use that platform to relate to the genetics, the microbiome, the environment, and develop even more refined models of what's going on in human metabolism that would predict going on to a disease trajectory versus non-disease trajectory. So basically, we think this also is something that would be critical for the areas of the world that are malnourished, and we're actually running a clinical trial, a couple of clinical trials now in Brazil and Bolivia to try to test these concepts. So the final kind of thought I want to leave you with is really this whole thing of systems biology and the big data. And here's a Volkswagen Golf and all of its pieces. And traditionally, scientists have, dissect biological systems in their constituent parts, and it's this reductionist way in which we've always been taught to think. And we identify all the components and many of the interactions, but we know that biological systems really are pretty complex and that they can't be explained or even predicted by studying all these individual parts, and that we really need to combine biology, mathematics, statistics, computer science, and these omics measurements to start to develop true systems biology approaches to kind of understand how do all these parts fit together to make the whole, and what are the emergent properties that come out of that, because many new emergent properties come out of the whole that you wouldn't have predicted from looking at the parts. So what we're doing is essentially we have to analyze and basically get access to all the major data sets, both the ones that we build in-house from all the clinical samples and biological samples that we generate, as well as what are in the public domain. Integrate these, be able to integrate these and actually curate these in a way that we can understand what's reliable and what isn't, and build graphical user interfaces to be able to generate how we will get the knowledge back out. And so the aim of the systems biology is to understand the biological process as integrated systems instead of isolated parts, and of course try to kind of reconstruct what's going on, not just at a single time point, but at a longitudinal progression of time points. And even when Aristotle was around, he knew that the whole was more than the sum of its parts. So the other way to look at this is all of these different inputs from human samples and animal models and cell cultures need to get inputted into this high throughput bioanalysis and technologies, and then the informatics core needs to be able to basically reduce this down to something usable, and then really the modeling is going to be key. And we're investing a huge amount into this whole systems biology in terms of not only the analysis, but actually building the infrastructure within the institute that will make these pipelines that can analyze the different data sets very efficiently. And so we're starting with the gut microbiome and also the genome platform, but we'll have to build all of these platforms in place. And we hired a guy named Bruno Sobral from Virginia Tech who built that major bioinformatics institute there to come and help us build that in the institute. So again, this then explains how we're building this integrated system. We're at about 100 people today. We're going to go to about 150 probably. Keep it small as possible for a complex problem, and try to focus our energies, but actually keep it integrated so that there aren't silos, that everybody is actually working together and sharing the data. And that goes along with building a really good LIMS system and ELS system. So our summary really is that we're trying to build these scientific platforms all within one shop to try to elevate and expand this role of nutrition. And since Nestle's been working in food for 150 years, you can imagine that if we could find some of the molecular activities of these natural products and be able to model how to actually deliver these in a targeted way, that these could be used not only in the food products that Nestle makes, but also in new medical nutrition forms that get developed by the Nestle Health Science Company in the future. So it's kind of like a continuum, and I think we'll more and more be thinking about what we're eating on a regular basis, and the more we understand about how these products work at the molecular level and at the holistic level, the better we'll be able to maintain our health and maybe develop ways in which to actually deviate from the disease state. So our long-term vision and goal is to apply these insights to the future of personalized nutrition for the maintenance of health and prevention of disease. And these are some of the people that have joined the Institute to date, and there are many more coming down the line. This was around March 2013. And I think what I would like to say in the meantime, while we and many others who are working along these similar lines, are waiting for these kinds of developments to actually take hold, I think one of the things you can do is move more, choose your ancestors wisely, and eat less. Thank you very much.
I thought that was really, really interesting. The question I have is, how do you position this in the arena where you have so many bogus nutraceuticals out there that do absolutely nothing for anybody, and yet people buy them by the cartful? I think your approach obviously makes sense to scientists, but I think that you're up against it. And
Yeah.
I think I'm interested in not just your view, but also the view of Nestle, who obviously is interested in selling foods and may have pressures that put them more in the nutraceuticals arena than in your arena.
Yeah, I think it's really one of the critical issues here is that nutrition and nutrition sciences are sort of a neglected kind of area of research. Medical doctors are not really trained actively, and for the most part, except where you have such a program at your institution in nutrition. And the issue around that is that nutrition has not been developed into the science of, say, what we do in the pharmaceutical business. And so what we have to overcome is to be able to generate data, right? And that's why Nestle said, look, we don't want you to be part of the food company. We want you to be at arm's length, because we know you've got to develop something that's new, that isn't food, right? It has to have this scientific underpinning. You have to run robust clinical trials, and you have to get regulatory approval that's at a much higher standard than you would for food. So basically, they said, look, we're going to make a long-term investment in building this institute and this company that's going to exploit the knowledge the institute develops, as well as go out and corral in other groups that are working in this area to develop products in this space. So it's a long-term vision, but you could imagine that you could drag the food companies more into this space by actually validating what some of these things really do at the molecular level, right? How your genome and the environment interact with your diet, and specific agents within your diet that actually have biological effects that are quite profound. So someone has to make an effort in this space, and Nestle said, look, we're going to invest literally billions into developing both the company and the institute to try to start to generate this knowledge.
Good question back here.
Yes, my question is this. A conundrum we've had forever with pharmaceuticals is that only 30% of the prescriptions are ever filled or used properly. There's a 60% fall off. We spend billions of dollars to invent all of this stuff and end up not using it well. And I'm wondering how the Institute links to the other expertise in Nestle or elsewhere to discuss the issues of behavior change in consumers and also behavior change in the prescribers, the medical care system, because that seems to be a rate controlling step in actually making the changes that can occur when after you've invented many of these solutions.
Yeah. I think the way I would answer that question to start is that, yeah, the Nestle, the food company, does a lot of interaction with the consumer. I mean, obviously, they are a consumer-driven company. The pharmaceutical industry is a medical professional-driven approach. It's not based on a consumer. It's based on we get something approved through robust clinical studies and through the regulatory process, and then once that is for that indication, then the medical practitioners will administer for the proper conditions. Whereas Nestle is actually working directly with the consumer. So what we want to try to do is bring both together to actually relate to the consumer as well as relate to the regulatory agency. And that's why it's kind of the space between food and pharma to try to, but you have to overcome a big activation barrier because everything is based on, the traditional pharma approach. And this is also going to have many of the same components of pharma, but it's going to be actually products that may be in the natural food chain already that have a lower safety barrier from the point of view of not having been in the diet before, not having any kind of safety data or toxicological data out there in patient populations. So the key is going to be to show very robust mechanism of action and clinical data to the medical professionals to allow them to start to change their behavior. In addition, those have to be coupled with diagnostics, and we're really, really, wanting to bring those two together. So basically being able to target and to be able to have mechanism of action and biological efficacy that really can convince the medical establishment to change the way in which they think about these products.
Ed, enjoyed your presentation. Can you expand on what you highlighted in one of the slides on the vision that the use of essential nutrients or their derivatives can lead to their development under conditions that either the EMEA or the FDA would normally have done a therapeutic? Mm-hmm. Will you engage that space? Will Nestle engage that space?
Yeah. So, yes, I think this is a great question. Maybe I'll answer it by giving one example. There was a company that was a very, very small company, and this gets to what Tim was talking about in terms of these $330,000 per year treatments. But this was a very, very small company that developed a food product for a deficiency in essential amino acid, phenylalanine. And essentially, basically, the food product actually is a synthetic food that is given to people who have PKU. And that basically overcomes the massive toxicity associated with phenylalanine buildup in the blood just by changing the diet and eliminating phenylalanine and increasing levels of tyrosine so that you get these essential amino acids into the diet and overcome a genetic deficiency, a dominant genetic deficiency. So, that's a really, I think, a simple, easy, straightforward example of where we want to go in the future.
Thanks, Ed.